have them yet. Okay, and so with that, I think we can start this new session on hardware. The next talk, the slides are going to come up in a second, is called Everybody Be Cool, This is a Robbery, given by Jean-Baptiste Pédrune. Please be calm, enjoy the session, and talk to you in a bit.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jean-Baptiste Pédrune. Today I will talk about HSM security. This is maybe this one is better. This is a joint work with Gabriel Campana. We are both security researchers at Ledger. I cannot pass the slides. So. Fine. And we got the opportunity to evaluate an HSM. We found vulnerabilities inside. So in this presentation, I will explain the bugs we found, how we exploited them, and more importantly, the methods we employed for that. So first, I will describe what is an HSM and the specificities of the HSM we evaluated. As most of our work is focused on the security of PKCS 11, I will introduce the standard. I will explain then why we had to develop a few tools to improve the security analysis of the device. And then I will talk about the bugs we found and how we exploited them to fully compromise the device and actually extract all of its secrets. So what is an HSM? An HSM is a hardware device that protects your keys. It is able to generate, store, and use cryptographic keys. It is a physical device. It can be either an internal device, such as a PCI card, PCI Express card, or an external device, such as a network appliance, for example. And it contains one or more crypto processors to speed up or to secure cryptographic operations. And also, almost all of them have anti-tampering countermeasures to prevent physical attacks on the device. So why are they used? They are used in many applications. The most prominent one is PKI. On public infrastructures, the certificate authority is stored into the HSM, at least its private key. And all the certificates that are delivered by this CI are actually signed by an HSM. They can also be found in bank environment, for example, to verify your CVV when you do a transaction, or to personalize your credit card. They can also be seen in telco to authenticate your device on the operator network. And actually, in many places where a long-term key must be really protected. So you can find them in many places, but there's not much public security research on the subject. Why? I'd say first is that they are expensive. So actually, no security lab can just buy an HSM and perform an assessment on it just for testing. Second, they protect secrets, and they're often disconnected from a corporate network, and most often out of scope during penetration tests, as companies do not want to lose all of their secrets during a pen test, because it can wipe itself if it detects an attack. And at last, there are a few vendors that sell HSM, and none of them provide detailed internal information about the way it works. So it's actually a big black box, and we have no idea of their internals. So we got the opportunity to evaluate an HSM. You can see it on the picture on the right, encircled in red. So this is an internal HSM, a PCI Express card. And what you can see is that it's all black. You see nothing. All the components that are covered by epoxy resin. So you do not have direct access to the components. And if you try to remove the epoxy resin, it will be detected, and the device will wipe all of its secrets, right? This HSM is certified FIPS 142 level 3. We'll see that later. And it has an Ethernet controller without connector. Actually, this HSM exists in two form factors, a network appliance and a PCI Express card. And we think it is actually the same device, except that in our case, the Ethernet connector is not soldered. The other one, we think it's the same, enclosed in a server. So we put it in a standard Linux server, installed the modules, kernel modules provided by the vendors and the utilities, and started our research on it. So briefly, I explained how you communicate with the HSM. You must write a client that will use the library provided by the vendor. This library will issue calls to the kernel. They will be transferred to the memory of the HSM using a shared DRAM stored on the HSM memory. The HSM will process this transaction, execute the cryptographic operation, and will send back the result to the host system. So all the transactions are performed on the initiative of the client. So this can be seen as a classic client-server architecture. As I said, the HSM is certified, and what I can say about that is that the certification is only about hardware attacks. So as I said, if you try to attack using a hardware attack, it will wipe itself, and you will lose all of its secrets. But this is not a certification about software attacks. So that means that if you try to attack using software methods, this device, you have no insurance that it will be safer than an uncertified device. So I introduced our device. I will not talk about PKCS 11, as most of our research is about the subject. So what is PKCS 11? It is a standard invented by RSA Security that aims to provide a generic interface to communicate with a cryptographic device. This device can be a smart card, an HSM, something able to perform cryptographic operations. It is a portable API. It defines an API which is named CryptoKey, and this is a portable API. That means that the code to communicate with a cryptographic device that supports PKCS 11 will be the same for every device. However, the implementation can be very different. You will not have the same stack if you communicate with a smart card and with an HSM, and various HSM have a very different stack. It defines APIs to perform cryptographic operations. These operations can be any kind of cryptographic operations: encryption, decryption, signatures, key generation, and so on. So the API is not that big, only a few dozen of functions in the standard. So the attack surface on the device doesn't look very big. But actually, most of these functions can be parameterized using mechanisms. And there are many mechanisms defined in the standard, more than 300. And vendors also add their own mechanism to get a very rich functionalities. So actually, the attack surface is much bigger than what we expected at the beginning. What are mechanisms? Mechanisms define a way to perform a cryptographic operation. So a mechanism for encryption, decryption, wrapping keys, and so on. And this mechanism really depends on the device that we consider. For example, a smart card will have very few mechanisms. Maybe one mechanism to generate an RSA key, one mechanism to encrypt using FreeDES, and one mechanism to sign data, and that's all. However, an HSM has much more functionalities. It will support many more ciphers. It will support authenticated encryptions, for example, and higher level constructions. And it will also possess custom mechanisms that will be used in telco or in bank environments. All these mechanisms take objects as parameters. What are objects? There are three types of objects defined in the standard. Keys, that can be secret, public, or private keys, certificates, and data that can be actually arbitrary data, but most of the time it is domain parameters used by DSA and ECDSA. So what interests us as attackers is obviously the keys, the secret and private keys. And CryptoKey manipulates objects through their handles. If you want to perform a cryptographic operation, for example, your client want to encrypt data. First, you generate a key on the HSM. You request the HSM to generate a key. The HSM will store the key in its memory and send back a handle to the client. The client then will send the data to be encrypted with the handle of the key previously generated, and the HSM will send back the encrypted results. So at no time, the key is sent back to the client. It always stays in the memory of the HSM, right? This is important for the rest of the presentation. Objects are composed of attributes. Each object has a class attribute that defines its role, and the other attributes depend on that class. For example, here is a private ECDSA key. You can see it has a value attribute. The value of the key is actually an attribute. And you can get its role. It can be used for signing in that case, not for encryption. And these attributes are critical for security. For example, an object that has a sensitive attribute, the value of this object cannot be extracted in plain text. It must be wrapped with another key. For example, usually a key that stays in the HSM. You have an extractable attribute. If the object is not extractable, its value can never be extracted, even if it's wrapped with another key. And another interesting attribute is a private attribute. It means that the user has to be logged in to access the object. Each object belongs to a token. What are tokens? Actually, when a user wants to log in into the HSM, it logs to a slot. What is a slot and a token? Actually, the token was the object at the beginning that contains the cryptographic objects, like a smart card, and the slot was a physical device that is used to access the token. In that case, it was a smart card reader. In the case of an HSM, the difference is a bit blurry. Actually, let's say that you have several slots on the HSM. Each slot has one token, and the objects are bound to a token. For example, if a user connects to the token on the left, it will only be able to access the object that belongs to that token, and not to the object that belongs to the token on the right. Okay. So from there, we can define a few threats. For example, an attacker that logs into a token must not be able to get the keys from another token. An attacker who tries to read the value of an unextractable key. This is an attack. But we will consider a much simpler model. In our case, we are in the position of an attacker who has no credential information, only unauthenticated access, and we want to access all the cryptographic data from other slots and to dump all the keys. The PKCS11 has been quite studied a lot in the previous years. Our work is a bit different. We do not look at the security of the standard, but the security of an implementation on a single HSM. Moreover, we give an insight of the internals of a given HSM. So let's start now with the vulnerability research. We consider that we are in a position where we have compromised a host that is able to talk with the HSM card, but we have no login information about it. We started using the software provided by the vendor. It was a CD-ROM that contained an SDK and a few code samples. And what was very interesting for us is that it contains also a firmware update. And that firmware update was just signed and not encrypted. And it was quite easy to extract. And we saw that it was running actually an old Linux kernel that was released 10 years ago. So we were sure that everything was not really up to date on that device. It contains a big library that actually embedded all the CryptoKey implementation. And we spent a few weeks doing reverse engineering on the library. This was not enough to get precise insight of the internals of the device. And looking at the features, we saw an unexpected option on this device, is that we are able to load code on it using custom models. The usage for this is to implement new mechanisms, for example, to filter a few messages, or things like that. This is not a vulnerability in itself. You must be admin to be able to upload a custom module. This is really a feature. And we developed two modules to gain information about the device. The first one was a shell. We modified BuzzyBox to get to be able to launch various commands on the device. And from a black box, we got something like that looked like a user-friendly device. We developed then a debugger, a modified version of GDB server. This was a bit tricky because actually the main process is responsible for the communication with the outside world, with the host. And if we debug it, we have no way to communicate with the outside world. So we had to develop, we had to create an auxiliary channel to be able to talk with the host even when debugging the main process. That worked, finally. And what we saw is that everything ran as root on the device, and there are no hardening nor mitigation options, so no ASLR, no stack cookie, and so on. So that means that every exploitable vulnerability can be enough to extract all the secrets. Let's see later. We wanted then to understand how sensitive data and cryptographic objects were stored on this device. Actually, all the persistent data is stored in a flash memory on the PCI card. What interests us is the PKCS11 object. They are stored in a single partition, dedicated page partition, that uses a proprietary file system. And actually, all the objects are stored in plain text on that partition, but sensitive attributes, all the sensitive attributes are encrypted using a key, which is external to the flash. It is located in another component on the right. So when you try to attack the HSM, and it is detected, that key is immediately destroyed. And then if you dump the flash, manage to dump the flash physically, actually you will get only access to public information. All the sensitive data will be encrypted, and you won't have a key to read it. But that also means that there's a single key for all the objects, all the sensitive attributes. So there's actually no logical separation across the HSM slots. Actually, if we manage to get code execution on the device, we should be able to extract and to decrypt all the secrets on the device. So let's go. The first thing we did was to find simple vulnerability on the device. So we looked at basic memory corruption bug, stack-based buffer overflows. We did a manual analysis on it, and we grabbed calls to memcopy to find a vulnerable call to memcopy. And actually, there was several hundreds of calls to memcopy, but this can be done quite easily manually. After a couple of hours, we managed to find there was a single call that was actually vulnerable to Stack Overflow in the Milnage derivation mechanism. This is an algorithm that is used by telco operators. This is a UMTS authentication algorithm. in that case, in the pseudocode at the bottom of the screen, you can see that there's a value of a key that is retrieved, and the size of this object of this attribute is never checked, and the value of the attribute is directly copied on a variable AES key on the stack. That means if you generate a big key on the device and you use it to derive a new key with lineage, it will trigger a stack overflow. From there, actually, code execution is very easy because there's no stack cookie on the device and no ASLR. But if you try to exploit it, actually, you will corrupt a lot of data on the stack. So resuming execution will be a bit difficult. And you have to be logged in to be able to call this mechanism with a specific key. Moreover, this bug is only present. This algorithm is only present in the latest version of the HSM. So we thought it would be a better idea to look for another bugs. And for that, we were a bit pissed with manual analysis. So we started to write a fuzzer. We imitated the message sent by the client to the HSM. And we actually wrote a dumb fuzzer that does a random byte mutation on the device. And the fuzzer is simple, but there were two main challenges. The first one is that the kernel module on the client side is not very robust, and actually we crashed the kernel of our host before sending correct data to the HSM. So this was the first problem. Second one is that by modifying some bytes on the data that was sent to the HSM, we triggered big memory allocation, and the HSM had no memory, and we got a lot of out-of-memory errors, and that was not interesting for a security point of view. So we had to filter all of these messages. But finally, we got a decent fuzzer that found 14 vulnerabilities, 14 different vulnerabilities on this device. All of them were more or less exploitable. All of them were memory corruption bugs. I will present two of them now. The first one is quite similar to Heartbleed, which was a vulnerability in OpenSSL that allowed you, for example, to dump the content of the memory of a server and to retrieve its private key. Here we have quite the same bug, and we are able to dump the memory heap of the HSM. You can see here blah on the top of the screen is actually the password of the admin slot we put on the device. So we can get really sensitive information like password and maybe encryption keys. But this bug is not very interesting for us because you need to be authenticated to trigger it, and that does not give you code execution. So we found another bug. We looked at an interesting mechanism, which is serialization on the HSM. Actually, you are able to start an operation, then to pause it and to resume it later. So you start, for example, a hashing operation on the device. You say that you want to restore it later, and the HSM will send you its state on the client. Then you send back the state to the HSM to restore the operation. And actually, if you mutate the state, you get a strange crash. At first, we think it was just a null-deref byte, null-deref vulnerability, which is not interesting for a security point of view, because it's usually not exploitable. But the stack trace was a bit unusual, and we dig a bit and saw that it was not a null-deref, but actually a type confusion bug. So actually, the byte which is encircled in red is the type of the digest you are restoring. And if you change it, you can actually restore a different hash object that's the one that was previously saved. And that allows you to call different methods on that object and to trigger some bug. From this primitive, from this bug, we managed to get two primitives. One was a read primitive that allowed you to dump the heap of the HSM. The other one was a relative write primitive. that allowed us to write data located after the state that had been restored. So I won't go into details, but by allocating several objects on the HSM and by triggering the bug, we were able to corrupt the memory of other objects and then get code execution from that. So once we had code execution without any authentication, we had to develop a payload because this is just the beginning of the adventure. This payload had to be specific because the usual payload, like running a shell or trigger a network connection, doesn't work because there's no shell on this device and no network connection. So we thought a bit, and we came to the conclusion that the easiest stuff to do was just to disable PIN verification on the device so that the attacker can just log in without any password. And that worked. And from there, we have admin rights, and we can use the custom module feature to upload a bigger library that is able to do what we want. For example, dump the wool content of the flash, and dump the encryption key that is needed to decrypt the flash. And this exploit is a single binary executed from the host. And it allows to get all the cryptographic keys from the HSM in plain text. We wanted to follow our analysis by looking at the way the signature, the firmware was loaded onto the HSM. Actually, I will start first with the signature verification of the custom module you can install of the device, because this is quite the same mechanism. So when you want to install a module, you first generate a certificate on the client, and you send it to the HSM. The HSM stores the certificate and sends back a certificate handle to the client. Then the client sends the module it wants to load, which must be signed with the certificate, with the handle of the certificate. If the signature is correct, the HSM stores the module and loads it into memory and executes it. It is almost the same for firmware updates, except that firmware updates can only be issued by the vendor. You cannot load your own firmware. And here is the process. Instead of supplying your own certificate, the client looks for an object which has a custom attribute on the HSM. This is a specific attribute that cannot be set by any user. And there's a single object that contains this attribute. This is the certificate that is used to verify firmware. The client then send back the handle to that certificate with the firmware data, and the HSM verifies the signature again. And if it's valid, writes the firmware to the flash, loads the firmware, and reboots. But actually, there's a logical bug here. When the client sends the firmware data with the certificate, the HSM never checks that the attribute is present on the certificate object. So actually, you can install any dummy certificate and provide a handle to that certificate along with the firmware data to bypass the firmware signature on the HSM. So you can actually load any firmware on the device. So to be able to do that, you have to be admin. But with the previous vulnerabilities I explained, you can be admin. From there, you can install a persistent backdoor on the firmware. And this is actually a critical bug, because this attack cannot be patched easily, because if the vendor patches the signature verification mechanism, you can still upload an older firmware to the HSM that will be accepted and trigger the signature verification bypass on it and load your backdoor firmware. So as a conclusion, I explained how we were able to trigger memory corruption bug that leads to a complete compromise of the HSM. and to dump all of its secrets. We are not sure the bugs we found also work on the networked version of the HSM. We think it will be the case, but we cannot be sure yet. We were able to dump the whole storage of the device and to decrypt all the secrets that it contained. We show a way to bypass the signature verification of the firmware and a way to break the integrity of the device. And we think this is hard to fix. All the bugs have been disclosed to the vendor. The vendor patched all of the bugs in a few months, and the software should be safer now. So I want to point out this is not an exhaustive HSM study. We only studied one model from one vendor. But we hope that our methodology can be used by other researchers to perform the same assessment on other models. Finally, I would say that most HSM are protected against hardware attacks, but this is, in our opinion, not enough. You have also to be protected against software attacks. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have time for a few questions.
So we don't have to outlaw crypto. We can just send your talk to the FBI, right?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Any other questions up there? Nope. Okay. If nothing else, then please let's thank the speaker again.
I think so. The last question.
Sorry. Yes, one last one.
I understand you were two guys working on it. How long did it take you to do all this?
I don't know. I'd say one summer, including holidays. So 2 months is the same.
Do you have a next target already?
We will be glad to follow our study on other devices, but we have no other devices and actually no time to spend on that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I think I just broke this mic somehow. Yeah. Okay. So the next one is TPM fail. TPM meets timing and lattice attacks by Daniel Mogimi, our speaker, Berk Sunar, Thomas Eisenbart, and Nadia Henninger. And let's see if what we can do now remotely, maybe.
Hello. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending my talk. Today, I'm going to talk about TPM fail, which shows some critical vulnerabilities on one of the most popular hardware security products. This is a joint work with Berk Sunar, Thomas Eisenbart, and Nadia Henninger. Well, TPMs can be found almost on any kind of computing devices, from your laptop to your computer, desktop systems, auto industry, industrial systems. Why is it so important to have these trusted platform modules everywhere? Well, we have known for a long time that softwares are vulnerable. We have seen the Heartbleed attacks, and many different types of attacks, rootkits. We cannot rely on the OS for security. And computers are just evil. We have seen lots of CPU attacks, so we cannot really rely on the host and the CPU to provide any root of trust for us. So there is a need for hardware-based root of trust. This need has been around for a long time now. And some people came up with a solution, some security chips called Trusted Platform Module, or TPMs. That these TPMs are embedded into your computer, into your laptop, and These TPMs are supposed to be tamper-resistant, side-channel resistant, and they provide some cryptographic functionalities. So you can basically narrow the root of trust, put your cryptographic keys inside this box, and then keep everybody outside of this trusted computing-based root of trust. So with that, we expect lots of cryptography functionalities here. There is an organization called Trusted Computing Group that they provide a standard on what these devices should support, what type of cryptography functionality, and with what kind of security guarantees and qualities. There are random number generators, hash functions, encryption modules, and digital signatures in this type of device. Today, we focus mostly on the digital signature. Well, we only focus on the digital signature. That's what the TPM fail attack is about. One thing we mentioned, okay, these devices are supposed to be tamper-resistant, side-channel resistant, and but how do we know, how can we even rely on that? Well, TCG also provides some certification that is done through some organizations like FIPS and CC, and these certifications are supposed to guarantee that these devices meet certain qualities, certain standards to be protected against attacks. And on the TCG website, you can find a list of devices that are considered to be certified. But again, as we talked about security via obscurity, we don't know anything about how these devices are implemented. They are just black box security chips. We mentioned digital signatures and why do we care about using TPM digital signature? Well, you can just use TPM as a trusted execution environment for digital signatures. There are lots of different applications like SSH or VPN or your email client or server that they can just keep the security key, the digital signature key inside this TPM module, and they can ask the TPM module to perform the signature generation. And now the latest version of OpenSSL, the Linux environment, they all support TPM by default. There is also the FIDO Alliance that they basically push to use TPMs for things like YubiKey, for things like two-factor authentication, and these devices all use digital signatures. And the other important thing about digital signatures for TPMs are that they need to support remote attestation. For instance, if I want to make sure a party on the other side of the network, on the other side of the world, has a legitimate computer, has a legitimate firmware running, I can actually use the digital signature PKI type of a scheme to verify if the other party is a valid device with a valid TPM firmware and version. The new version of TPM, TPM version 2, support elliptic curve digital signatures. And this has been popular for a while now. Almost all new laptops and computers since Windows 10 all support TPM 2 instead of TPM 1.2. So the question is, with these certifications, with all these black box obscurity, are these devices really secure? Can we really rely on these devices for secure transactions, secure encryption, and et cetera, et cetera? So we did the most simplest and most common sense test to actually see if these devices can handle side channel attacks. And so we did a timing test. We want to do a timing test. And the first thing we need to do a timing test is a good timer. One way to measure the time of a TPM device, for instance, is to use the power signal using oscilloscope and get a very high resolution timer. But that's not very scalable. That's not very easy to use. So we just try to make a timer using the CPU frequency. We know that the CPU runs much faster on a TPM device because the TPM device is generally based on a small microcontroller. It runs with maybe less than 100 megahertz frequency. But our CPU is generally more than 2 gigahertz, and the TPM is generally attached to our system. So we can just use the CPU cycle count as a timer. So we started our test when we started this work, like last January. We started, OK, let's look at the most common TPM product on our computers, which is a product called Intel Platform Trust Technology, or Intel PTT, which is essentially a firmware TPM that is integrated into your CPU. It has its own processor inside the CPU package. It runs as part of the management engine, which management engine hasn't been a very trustworthy, secure security system in the past. But we also rely on this management regime to run the firmware TPM, basically. But what is important is even if the CPU, the host CPU is compromised, that it doesn't have any access to the management engine directly. And this has been supported on almost all new operating system, Windows, Linux systems. So we did a simple test. I ran the ECDSA that is supported by this firmware TPM, and it gave me some distribution, histogram distribution. I was like, OK, we did a simple test, and this is clearly not constant time when I measure the timing from the CPU using the CPU cycle count. For some of the signatures, it runs faster. For some of the signatures, it runs slower. So there is a suspicion that here we are leaking something about the nonce, which is the only thing that changed when we sign different messages using the same key. We created a tool. We modified the Linux kernel stack for these TPM devices. And we try to measure the timing of the TPM operation as close as possible to the interface of these devices. When we did this measurement, we realized that, OK, the same timing measurement gets to a very clean-cut distribution with different peaks, like 3 or 4 different peaks, depend how many measurements we do. And each peak has a frequency, has like 16 times more than the next one. So this kind of gave us the idea that, OK, this ECDSA implementation is probably based on some fixed window implementation, and they probably leaked something about the nonce. That's the idea that we got from this. And this also matched our previous observation of some of other Intel's cryptographic libraries and products. So with this, we got some confidence. I'm like, OK, we have this tool. We're going to collect some devices in the lab, like desktop computers, some Intel NUC computers, laptops, and run our tool and see how do they behave, how do these devices behave when we do a timing test on public key schemes like RSA and ECDSA. Among these devices, most of them were used the Intel FTPM. We even updated these devices to the latest version of their firmware, to the latest version of the Intel Management Engine firmware. And we noticed that, OK, the timing behaviors are still there. And even other devices have some non-constant time behavior for RSA computation, for ECDSA computation. And most importantly is that that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the talk is Intel FTPM and ST microelectronic devices, they actually have vulnerable ECDSA implementations. So there is a more in-depth analysis of other like we analyze RSA and et cetera in the paper. But to focus on the ECDSA, this time we programmed the device with a known key instead of using just an unknown key that is generated inside the device. And we unblinded the nonce that is used for this signature. And we noticed, OK, there is a direct correlation for every additional 4-bit of leading 0-bit in the nonce with the timing operation of this ECDSA computation. And Intel TPM device supports ECDSA, C-Schnorr, BN256K, and they were all vulnerable in a similar fashion with just different timing distribution. And then we got to this one. This is the timing distribution we got from running ECDSA on the ST Microelectronics TPM device. And at first sight, when I ran this, I didn't pay enough attention, and I thought it's constant time. It looks like a normal Gaussian distribution. But when later on the next day, I looked at it more closely, and I'm like, OK, it seems like the left side of the plot is like it's less steep. So there is actually a timing behavior here. This is not actually a balanced Gaussian distribution. So similarly, I programmed the device with a known key and then unblinded the nonces, and I noticed that, OK, there is actually a direct correlation between the time and every additional leading 0-bit in the nonce. So this time, it's similar. For every short nonce, we get a faster time. So if I compute ECDSA, if the nonce that is used for that signature is short, the computation is going to be much faster. So based on this, now that we have 2 vulnerabilities, we created an attack. This attack, basically, we have a template. We know that with what threshold these signatures are going to be biased, how many leading 0-bits they're going to have. And when we have the template, we're going to collect some signatures from the device. And using the template and the timing samples we have collected, we can basically filter the signatures that are biased, that they have been generated with a biased nonce. And then we applied the standard lattice-based attack to recover the key from these devices. So in the final attack we actually just asked the TPM device to generate this key instead of programming it with the non-key. How does the lattice attack work? I'm not going to go to the detail of what lattices are and how they work, but general overview is basically we rewrite the ECDSA equation in a way that the public parameters are on one side and unknown parameters are on the other side. And then we get this nice small linear equation here, system of equation here. And then we can basically construct a hidden number from these because we know that all the nonces KIs are smaller than some size because we can leak if a signature is generated based on a small nonce. So this is a standard hidden number problem that is introduced many years ago, and it has been studied by many people in side channel community, in theory community as well. And yeah, and we constructed a lattice like this using the public parameters, and we applied the common LLL and BKZ algorithm to actually extract the keys from these devices. We did some analysis of how efficient these attacks are on these devices. For Intel FTPM, we did the analysis with 3 different thread models. Well, for TPM, even a system adversary, even a physical adversary is part of the thread model. But we wanted to see what is the impact of such a timing behavior, like from a user space, from network. And here on the plot, we can see some of the results for the system adversary that, for instance, we can recover the key with a lattice dimension of 80 or that range of kind of lattice dimension. So on Intel FTPM, we could basically recover the private key in like 3 or 4 minutes. And the time is just time to collect the signatures. The computation of the lattice just takes a few seconds because it's a small lattice. It's a small lattice size. For ST Microelectronics, which is a CC certified device and it's supposed to be protected against timing attacks and side channel attacks, we could recover the key in 80 minutes, which again is the time to collect that amount of signature, 40,000 signatures. And with that, we moved to, okay, what else can be done with these devices? So timing attacks, remote timing attacks have been demonstrated more than 15 years ago. There are various work on remote timing attacks on RSA and ECDSA. And TPMs are very close to like some of the smart cards that they used to have a timing issue. But the difference here is if I connect a TPM device to a network, which is a very common scenario, and it has a vulnerability, timing vulnerability, it is going to be highly exploitable and be exposed to the network because this device runs with a very low frequency. So even some timing distribution with lots of network noise can still be observed from a remote adversary. We came up with a case study for this. We looked at some of the applications, and one of the applications that actually have default configuration to use TPM is a strong SWAN VPN solution. So we use the configuration that is provided by the product, by the software, and we configure the server to use its built-in Intel TPM solution to do the authentication with a client. So a malicious client that connects to this VPN server is going to, by default, do a DFIA monkey exchange, get a shared secret, and after that, it needs to authenticate to the server. In this authentication, when the client sends its parameters to be signed by the server is not going to have the private key in its own memory, and the private key is going to only exist in the storage, the secure storage of the TPM device. And then the VPN server asks the TPM device, OK, sign this message and give me back the response, which is the signature. And then the server is going to provide the signature to the client, and the client can verify if the server is actually a legitimate server or not. But at the same time, the client can keep doing that until it collects some number of signatures with timing samples. And every time, the client can just drop the communication and try to issue another handshake. With that, the client can basically have enough timing information to learn good amount of information about the TPM the private key for the server that was actually only stored in the TPM device. So we did an analysis of this attack, and we actually managed to recover the private key from a server after like 44,000 handshakes. And it took us 5 hours to do a remote timing attack in this very practical scenario. And 5 hours for a remote attack on a TPM device is something that I would say it's not good in 2020 as like a result, really. Yeah, so in this case, we could basically recover the TPM, the key basically in like with 60, 70% success probability, for instance, with a lattice dimension of 90. So with that, I would like to also show a comparison of different timing distribution we did in our work. So we build up our attack like eventually. We started with the system adversary. OK, the system adversary gets a side channel leakage that is almost perfect. There is no noise. We can just use this to recover the key in a very predictable way. And then as we do the measurement harder, as we make the scenario stronger, we basically have some noise. For instance, the user adversary, we can see in the like blue one that, OK, there are more noise. Or we also implemented our own small network application, which doesn't have any handshake or protocol, and we saw that, OK, we can still recover the key. And finally, we saw that, OK, even with a real application, the timing distribution is too good that we can still recover the key. So we went through the responsible disclosure. We first reported our first finding to Intel. Intel acknowledged the receipt, and they actually told us the reason this was vulnerable is they were using an outdated version of their Intel IPP cryptography library. And this library, we actually reported similar issue to this, about this library to Intel maybe 1 or 2 years ago, but this shows that even the vendors, sometimes they forgot to update their own products that they're using their own cryptography libraries. So a firmware update came out in November as we released this issue, and if anybody using a CDSA and Intel product, they really need to update their firmware to avoid this vulnerability. We also reported this issue, ST Microelectronic vulnerability to ST. They were quite surprised that this is even possible. They acknowledged the receipt. They acknowledged that, OK, it's fine, you're right. And we had lots of calls, lots of emails to clarify, OK, that's the disclosure process. Surprisingly, they never had any experience, anybody report any vulnerability to them, or knowing what is a process for responsible disclosure, which maybe it shows how good they are in terms of, I don't know, producing products. So we verified that the new version that they patched this issue, and they provided us with a new device, and we verified that, OK, the new version that they patched now is secure against our attack last September. And since then, there are 2 OEM vendors that they have issued firmware patch for this issue. And ST also released the list of devices that they were vulnerable to this problem. And if anybody, I don't know, in the industry, in the car manufacturing, or every place that there is no update for this firmware, they really need to take cautions and actually go and fix this problem and use an updated version of this device. There is also a challenge here, which if anybody is interested in looking at this, we noticed that the Infineon TPM device, which is even a more popular dedicated TPM solution, also has a timing variation in their CDSA computation. But with the test we did, we couldn't find any proper correlation between the nonce and the timing behavior. But it could be something that we didn't pay enough attention to it. So with that, I would like to take questions. There is the link to the website, the source code, and this paper is going to be also presented at the next Usenix conference in Boston the upcoming summer. Thank you.
OK, questions? Kenny.
Hello, thank you for the great talk. Could you say a little bit about how remote the server was, or the client was, sorry, in the remote attack setting?
So
how many hops?
Yeah. So we configured a switch and 2 computers that they are talking to each other over this normal gigabit switch.
Via switch,
Yeah.
a single switch.
Yeah.
Okay, good luck doing it in a WAN. You can try.
Yeah. Why I think, yeah, on cloud environment or, yeah.
Yeah, most of the time the host chip and the TPM chip are separate. What kind of mechanism we have to make sure that communication is secure too?
So that communication, I've seen some people have done some work on tapping on the LPC bus and, for instance, leaking things there. But in this particular case that we are attacking the public signatures, we don't care even if that communication is not secure, because the secrets, which are the nonce and the private key, they will never be even communicated from the TPM device and the CPU. But in other case scenarios, for instance, some people may try to send the private key to the TPM device, or may use the TPM device in a way that, okay, they program the device, then yeah, the communication against can be tapped, and that's an attack that has been known actually for a long time.
Okay, thank you.
So for your last question, so you said that there is no correlation between the time and the nonce, the weight of nonce. Did you check if there is any correlation with the inverse of the nonce?
We did some checks, like for instance, we did bit frequency correlation test, and we did leading 0-bit test, and we couldn't find anything with that. But that could work, that the one you say that maybe there's a reverse correlation, or another thing we thought maybe there could be an encoding before using the nonce. Like they may encode the nonce to some Booth recoding or WNAF representation, and then they could do the computation. But we really just ran out of time and energy to actually do more analysis.
Question to Serge, why would you suggest the inverse of the nonce?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Okay, other questions? I maybe have one. Did you, in your discussions with the vendors, suggest fixes to them, or did they come up with them and you checked whether it would work, or?
So with Intel FTPM, in 2018, well, just a couple of years ago, last year, we shared a tool with the Macrovac, and we analyzed their cryptography library, and we already found a similar issue there, and they already fixed it there. So the only thing they had to do was to update the firmware, which was a surprise for us that it took 9 months for them, and they asked us for such a long embargo date. With ST Microelectronics, they gave us a new TPM device with a new laptop, and then we verified it, and like, okay, this is now fixed.
Okay, thank you very much then. Thanks again. I'm gonna get in trouble here. Oh, you just can't turn it to the side. Okay. Easy. Okay, our next and last speaker is for today is Roberto Avanzi. He's going to talk about memory protection for the ARM architecture. All right.
Hello and good afternoon. So actually what I will be talking about today is for general purpose computing, but since I work for an employee that shares my initials, I will have to specify that what we have been doing is on the ARM architecture. So how does the remote work? This is supposed to work. Ah, the other one. This one. So this work has been done by people at the TARDIS. That's my team at ARM, stands for Team for Analysis, Research and Development in Security, together with a host of other people from various institutions and also other companies that are in our partnership. And building and standing on the shoulders of a few giants that have worked on this area for us before. So the topic of my talk will be confidentiality of memory contents, and now this comes a mouthful, and memory integrity violation detection. And why? Why am I about to stand between you and the reception? Well, the reason is that memory contents are important. We are stakeholders that put some of our assets in the memory of a computer. And as soon as you have this, well, you have a security problem. And so the usual cat and mouse game begins. So RAM can be read by software, then use access control. You have cold boot or platform reset attacks. Then encrypt things. Use ephemeral keys to avoid things to be correlated across boots. Do you have attacks that can adaptively modify the contents of your memory? Then use unfreshness so that you encrypt the same thing twice. You get different things. We have seen these things this morning when Iwata-san gave his fantastic speech. And of course, add integrity to prevent these modifications. And indeed, this is not a new problem at all. There's a great abundance, a great affluence of commercial and academic solutions, starting from the seminal work on XOM, Aegis version 2, Bastion, and going to commercial solutions like SGX, Secure Blue++, and many others. So to be clear, I'm a technical person at ARM, and I'm not announcing any product, nor any feature today. It's not my job, and my employer pays handsomely other people to do this. But of course, we would just be a giant bunch of idiots if we were not studying this problem. So I will be limiting myself to tell you what we have studied to protect memory contents cryptographically. Okay, security problem, let's talk about threat models. And there is a big misconception sometimes. People say, well, we have client devices and infra devices, which means everything that is in cloud, the edge, the fog. This is the wrong assumption, because memory protection is always needed when the owner of some software or some data does not want the internal state of their stuff to leak or to be tampered with while it is running and beyond. This might be some software module running on your device, handling some DRM scheme, but it could also be your application or virtual machine running in the cloud. And there is something in common between these two scenarios. In both scenarios, the software runs on somebody else's computer. And in both scenarios, again, an attacker might use software running on the same platform or some hardware manipulation to get at your stuff. And even the hardware's owner can be an adversary. Never trust somebody that says, trust us, it is running on my platform and I'm keeping it safe. So what is in the security perimeter and what is not? Well, okay, the CPU is there, fine. The boot ROM, of course, it must be there, otherwise it can't configure anything for security. And what else? Well, there are two scenarios where one splits into two on its own. The first one is that the memory might be internal, which means it is on the same die as the CPU, or it is package in package, pip, in the same package as the CPU masters that need to process the stuff, maybe with some anti-tamper measures. In this case, you cannot interpose the memory. You can't put really something very easily, at least, between the CPU and the memory. So you can assume that the memory device is essentially trusted because it is inside your security perimeter. So the threats are mostly cold boot attacks and platform reset attacks. And variant of this scenario, you might want to consider things like row hammer or fault injection as attacks that can be mounted on your device. Hello? The second one is when the memory is external. That means it could be socketed. It could be soldered on the motherboard. Look, these guys, which of course I have no idea who they are, they designed these things that you could place a square on the motherboard, and they have the two chips, but they are soldered on the motherboard. They are close to the chip, but they are soldered on the motherboard. They actually did this on an iPad. Or you can have the package on package. So you put something on a ball grid and lay on your motherboard, and it also has a socket on its own, and you put something atop. In all these cases, you can actually easily interpose memory. And don't trust people that say this attack is difficult. So threats here are augmented by actually bus reading and memory transaction tampering. But we are lucky. There are easy solutions, and I already mentioned them a couple of slides ago. So you encrypt all the memory. Okay, you are considering some easy modifications of the memory, some fault injection, rowhammer. Well, then hash all the memory. And if you want to defend yourself against those attackers that can actively modify things and replace stuff into your memory, then hash also the hashes, and you get a Merkle tree. By the way, it was very nice today to see Ralph Merkle. So we are celebrating. I did not know he was going to be here, so that's really a coincidence. I didn't have it this morning. So we are done, and you can go to the reception, right? Are we? Are we done? No, actually. And why is that thing? Well, you know, stuff costs. You develop things, you put things into silicon, you had some hashes and things, and this is going to make performance slow. And there is a very, very sad truth in our business. Because there are two things that nobody expects. Which is the first one? Nobody expects? What? No, the Spanish Inquisition. The second thing that nobody expects is that any piece of technology that kills performance and wastes memory or disk or whatever, for whatever purpose, will ever be widely deployed, unless it is, of course, some spyware, adware, or bloatware, including blockchains. I had a much harsher joke here, but legal at the company told me, no, don't call them what you're saying, use this word. Okay, so we have some nice solutions already in the market for these. So for instance, SGX has a very sound cryptographic protection. So Intel guys, we are competitors, but actually making a compliment for you. But there is a 26.7 memory overhead and a 25% performance penalty in our testing. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the secure extensions for virtualization or something like that by AMD, which on paper offers you much better performance, no memory overheads, but encryption is not announced and there is no integrity. So it is almost as if you had nothing there. So I decided to try to have something, let's say, ideally, with the first level of security, with a second performance impact. And so I started a project which is called the MOPED at ARM. It stands for Memory Opacification. This word exists, look in the Merriam-Webster. Performance evaluation and design. And so as any project of this kind, it contains a survey of the state of the art, new ideas, because we are an IP company, benchmarking and selecting the winners. So let's start. The first thing was to collect requirements. So we had to consider confidentiality. And for this, we want top secret security level against various types of adversaries. Why? You say, well, you have live things, you have things in memory and things at rest. The second one needs a better protection, which is wrong, because an attacker will always try to take the lowest hanging fruit. So if you're using a weaker cryptographic protection to store some important data while it is in memory, then you grab it from the memory and not from the disk. We want 20 years of classical security at a minimum and adequate post-quantum resistance if we can do that without spending a penny, which means we want at least 128, actually 80, bits of security, both classical and post-quantum, which means 256 bits worth of keys, because post-quantum. For integrity, we take the Wikipedia definition. It shall be computationally infeasible to corrupt memory, but forging the integrity structure. And we have the same time restrictions on that observation, and we can talk that offline. We concluded that we needed 60 bits for the max, not 56, as some of our competitors, because that could be soon borderline. And we include 64-bit counters, at least, in their computation. OK. So our state-of-the-art review led us to select some potential primitives for these, which are the AES, of course, which is a standard. I claim it isn't really, because when this great cipher was designed, memory encryption and these type of applications were never on the scope. Deoxys, which is a version of AES turned into a tweakable block cipher. I don't have to define this because this was mentioned this morning as well. I'm quite lucky today. And then there is, of course, karma, because I designed it, so I want to use my own stuff. And it was developed for the right size. It is public domain, so if you want to use it, you don't have to pay anybody. It has a solid theory, in my very, very not so humble opinion, and it has been well analyzed in the meantime. Various modes of operation, which basically are direct encryption. It means that the obfuscation path goes through the cipher, or what we call one-time pad encryption, OTP. It's very common in the industrial world to abuse this word, which means that you generate a mask. You use the cipher to generate a key stream, and that is stored to your secret. And the various types of hashing and mechanisms. And now I promise you headaches. A few examples will follow, and there will be a lot of diagrams. I tell you one thing. It is to make you empathize with us, because we implemented all of them and many more. So our headaches were even bigger. So of course, we start with GCM, which is basically a counter mode followed by encrypted polynomial authenticator in a Galois field. That's why it is Galois counter mode. So we all know how it works. We have a key there, and we use it to encrypt an initialization vector, which can be, in this case, the memory address and the counter put together. And then for each block inside the same cache line, you concatenate also a different number, and you use it to generate, by encryption, different masks, which are then used to get the ciphertext from the plaintext. And what you do, you use your Horner scheme to evaluate a polynomial in a magic value h using the blocks of the ciphertext as the coefficients of your polynomial. So take with an h, you multiply C0 by h, you add to C1, you multiply by h, and at the end, then you encrypt, again, with the same technique, your value there to get your tag. We all know this thing. Or a counter mode, but you can do something finer. This is one of the beautiful ideas of Intel's memory encryption engine. Hey, the second time I say something good for you. And which is to actually chop the ciphertext into blocks, multiply each one by a different secret magic value, which is generated randomly at boot, and you then add all these things. The nice thing is that it can be done in parallel or pipelined. And then, of course, you encrypt these, and you get a multilinear universal hash function encrypted as your authenticator. Fine. And then, of course, we have a even more complicated thing. I don't have to describe this. Again, thank you, Tatsu, because it is OCB, which we know it is encryption, direct encryption. So you see the data obfuscation path from the P to the C goes through E, but there is some mask before and after. And this is the XEX construction, that's the XE construction. And we know it is a very, very fragile construction. But if we limit ourselves to this, it still stands on its feet. It's inefficient, but it's there. And this is just a limited set of examples of encryption techniques we can use. And of course, we can use a tweakable block cipher, which we know gets you the ciphertext from the plaintext by using the key, which must be kept secret. But there is another parameter called the tweak, which can be even manipulated and chosen by an attacker in the security model. And they should not be able to violate the confidentiality of your stuff by manipulating it. And so we get the tweakable codebook mode, which was also seen today. We have only one key here. The data obfuscation path goes through the encryption function, but the key is always the same. There is no masking before and after, but you get your nonce concatenated with different values and a magic value here for the tag to the encryption, which is actually much simpler conceptually, at least, to see. To design a good tweakable block cipher, well, let's see between us. I hope I was able to. Otherwise, I'm in big trouble. OK, but we can use these in a very nifty way also to simplify some security proofs. Counter in tweak encryption. So we use the tweakable block cipher to generate a key stream, to XOR the plain text with it to get the ciphertext. The nice thing is that we use the same counter here. So when you write to the same cache line, you have to change the counter. So but that's how you get the freshness. So the cool thing is that you use the address here. So each location in memory has its own function to generate this key stream. And it can be seen as a pseudo-random function, not a pseudo-random permutation of the nonce. That simplifies a bit the proofs because you don't have to resort to the switching, you have tighter bounds and things like that. Okay. And of course, you can do the same trick. You add a multilinear universal hash function encrypted, that's there, the encryption function, as an authenticator, and you get this. And there are many variants also for these, but these were just a few of these. But this was just the easy half of the story, because integrity is actually much worse. So we have the Merkle tree, we have seen these, you chop the memory into blocks, you hash them, you put the hashes in some bigger blocks, you hash these until you get something that stays at the top, and in order to make sure that this can't be manipulated, you store securely inside the security perimeter the tip of this Christmas tree. And then, of course, we have counter trees. Who knows counter trees? No? Well, it's a nice structure, because if you see this one, there's a problem. You can verify things in parallel. You just have to verify all the hashes. But you have to update these. You have first to hash this. And then you hash again these to get these. And then you hash all of these on the top to get a top value. So this cannot be done in parallel. So Hall and Utila and then other people devised techniques, which now we call counter trees, to be able also to update these structures in parallel. And the idea is that you have a live memory region, and you have your data blocks. And you have a special region for the max. So you take your data, you have a counter associated to this data. You see each block of data has some counter. And so you put them both to inputs to a keyed hash function, and then bang, you get your tag. And then you do that for each block. Then you have a third region of the memory, which is the counter tree region, where you actually put the counters. And these counters are put in a cache line in a little block together with their tag. So instead of being stored somewhere else, you store them all together. So you have you hash the counter above with the counters, which is the data inside your block, in order to get the little tag. And you continue. The nice thing about this structure is that it cannot only be verified in a parallel way, like a Merkle tree, but it can also be generated, recomputed, updated in a parallel way. And the top counter stays securely on chip. And then you have this monster, which are split counters, which I only put here to show off my prowess with the ticks. And it's the same thing. You have data, you have a keyed hash, and you store here in a tag. But what is all these things, this web of things above? Instead of putting 8 counters of 64 bits, say, in a 512-bit line, we put 64 small 6-bit things and one 64-bit major counter. So whenever you write, say, to the 0, little c0 is updated. But of course, since it is only 6 bits, after 64 writes, well, cache addictions, these will overflow, which means that when this one overflows, you reset all of these to 0. You update the major counter, and then you have to recompute all these tags here. So you might say, well, it's a lot of work. Yes, but since the arity of the tree has increased a lot, the trees get much smaller, verifications get faster. The information about the counter is much more compact because you store 64 values where usually you store only 8. And so you reduce cache pressure. And so with this nifty trick, which is from a conference in 2006, I don't remember which one, Micro, I think, then you get much better performance. And there are other techniques. There are the tech, the PAT, and whatever you want to call them. And I even haven't started talking about variations on the theme of split counters, so don't get me into this. Still have 10 minutes, right? Yes, something. 5? Oh, my God. So too many variants. So we have no encryption, encryption only, encryption integrity tree, enter-replay. We have direct or OTP encryption. We have monolithic and split counters. We have also the ability to say, hey, we can save in the MAC region by using, instead of just one MAC per cache line, we combine two MACs and hash them together somehow to get one value each 2 cache lines or each 4 ones. And then we can verify the MACs in a synchronous way with the decryption or not. You can see there are easily about 249 different combinations we can have. It is odd because nothing has no variation. So we select some, and we have them fight each other on benchmarks. The benchmarks are SPEC 2006 and 17 on full system emulators for the A57 and A75. The A75 emulator is a bit buggy, so some tests just don't run at all. But I mean, it's a little closer, let's say, for instance, to the Graviton 2 CPUs that Amazon uses. They use A76, it's a bit faster, but. And we emulated the crypto hardware by inserting latencies in the data paths of the emulator. And these latencies are real world latencies because we have synthesized the cryptographic hardware we are going to use. So that's what you get, for instance, for the lowest level. I'm going to be very quick. You get, for instance, if you have just XX for AES, so similar to what AMD is doing, here 24% impact, no, 3%, sorry, and we get around about 1 something for the other versions. So this is actually the cheap version, just encrypting things. So let's skip 2017. Let's make these things fight. So if you are using just simple encryption with NextEX mode, we have about 5%. What this thing does not work anymore. 5%, yes, 5%. If we use Karma instead of AES-128, we are really on a negligible level of 1.6%. We can use this with the freshness and split counters, we are still there. We add integrity, we increase significantly the penalty. Then we start using monolithic counters with the direct encryption and no freshness. And then we use actually the full Santa Barbara that we have in our arsenal, which is also what Intel is using, but tested here on a lot of suites. And we get about 25% performance penalty. If we use split counters, we go down to this, which is about 8.7%. If we make the granules bigger to save some memory on the Macs, we can get to about 10% with double granules, and then it gets a bit uncomfortable if we use 4 different cache lines into one single Mac. And you see, the nice takeaway here is that if we go from split counters here, the same thing, but you do the verification of the Macs asynchronous with the decryption, which might open a very little window for side channels, so we have to be very careful there. We go down to about 7%. And we have more tricks to bring down to about 5, actually. But I'm not allowed yet to talk about this. I'm filing IP today. So that's actually the takeaway of this slide. With the current state of the art on the market for good protection, so what Intel is providing, we get a 26.7 performance penalty. Using split counters instead, we get down to 7.8%. What about, that's the memory overhead. So we had the 25% memory, so slow down and 26.7% memory overhead. And here we get 7.8% in memory overheads. So the takeaways. This can be my last slide or not, depending on the questions. We have done the first comprehensive comparison of the field. A paper is upcoming. We tested thousands of things. Well, no, we didn't. We selected a few, but I could have shown you 25 different diagrams, and you would have had a horrible headache. We have significant improvements with respect to the state of the art, which means, for instance, with something like this, an 8.7 performance penalty and 7.8 memory overhead, they're both the psychological threshold of 10%. So that might make this type of technology acceptable in a wider sense. Sacrificing some of the feature does not give a big performance or memory overhead improvement, so it's really better to use the whole banana. What you get somehow is that the memory bandwidth, the actual memory usage, increases by 83%. We are going to use almost twice as much memory traffic as before. This is the only price which looks bad, but if you look at it, this translates to about less than 10% performance penalty, less than 10% memory overhead, you can accept this. So I'm almost ready. I want to tell you one last thing. I want to thank the NIST. Are there people from the NIST here? Yeah, so they rejected Chameleon, and for the wrong reason, because it was my system for encrypting memory that I proposed to the lightweight standard because of a typo in the spec, really. But with respect to 1 year ago, we have a much, much better understanding of memory protection requirements, and so better techniques. So every cloud has a silver lining. Thank you, actually. I'm sincere. We will submit these techniques to your open call for modes, so it's not easy to get rid of us. But I'm really sincere. Your rejection actually prevented all of us to have potentially suboptimal things in standards. So this is all I wanted to say. Can you do better? We are in New Amsterdam here. Can you do better? Well, then if you think so, schlep your thukis to your work desk and show us what you can do next year in the old Amsterdam. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have time for a couple of questions.
Seems everybody's hungry.
Thirsty.
Or thirsty.
So was the typo in the spec the Q in Chameleon, or?
Sorry, what?
Was the typo in the spec, was that the Q in Chameleon?
No. That was actually intentional. I have much worse things, like that. My humor sometimes gets a bit overboard. It was really, I made a mistake in writing down how you compute the trick separation for the authentication tag. So there was such an easy forgery that I wanted actually to take a shovel, dig a big hole, and hide myself there forever. But it is not the first time I make a mistake in crypto. It happens.
Okay, any serious question? Oh, yeah, right here.
Yeah, on the slides that you compared the 25% with the 7% from your crypto system, I noticed the 25% was on the 512 bits and then 7% was on the 124 bits.
Yes.
I'm wondering why the comparison was not on the same level of bits between
Well,
the two.
because, so, you can do this, of course, but it's not what is now on the market. So I'm comparing what we could do, or actually we are implementing for Silicon, actually, not announcing any product feature, but this is what is on the market now. This exists. These all do not, but this is what we could be aiming for, what we probably will aim for. That's the reason. And that also needs additional techniques to make us capable of combining MX without having to do too many recomputations, which are also original ideas.
So if Intel wanted to compete, they could offer 13%.
We could say we go from 26 to have memory overhead to 14% and have actually a better better performance. But I would prefer to take a little hit in performance and have a nearly halving. Microsoft people went gaga when they saw the numbers.
So I'm not sure I understand the logic behind needing such a large MAC. After all, a authentication attack can only really make sense when the machine is powered on, and the uptime of any machine is usually not decades.
Yes, you could use a 32-bit one. We have partners asking, why can't we do a 48-bit one? This is still up to debate. So to be honest, I would feel a bit uneasy having 32-bit MACs. But you could have them in the bottom. This is something that is still open. But since I'm not still completely secure about the extra security, sorry for this, redundant redundancy, at the moment we still test 64 bits. If we agree that having 32-bit MACs at the bottom is okay, then we go for that.
Okay, if no further questions, let's thank all the speakers of this session. And Tom has a quick announcement.
Just two quick announcements. I literally just found a coat check, number 230, so if you want your coat and didn't take a picture of it, you should come up and get it. And there's now a reception going on down the stairs in the smaller breakout room, so please enjoy. Thank you.